Hey, Reddit. I'm not sure where to start with this because my life feels like it's been flipped upside down in the past 48 hours. My name's Kurt, and I thought I had it all figured out. 6 years of marriage, a house we worked tirelessly to buy, plans for kids. You know, the classic dream. And then Janet, my wife, decided to drop a bombshell. It happened Thursday night. I came home after a long day at the construction site, tired but happy because I'd finished up a big project. I was looking forward to just crashing on the couch and maybe convincing Janet to watch a movie with me. Instead, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, looking all serious. She had this look I couldn't place, calm but cold. "We need to talk," she said. My stomach dropped instantly. Isn't that always how these things start? She told me she wanted a trial separation. Her words were measured, like she'd practiced them in the mirror a dozen times. According to her, it was about rediscovering ourselves and rekindling the spark. Then she went on about how I'd become less romantic, how I wasn't paying enough attention to her, and this one stung, how I'd let myself go. She even pointed out my weight gain like it was some kind of deal breaker. I was stunned. Just completely blindsided. I tried to defend myself, telling her how hard I'd been working to save money and secure our future. I brought up the long hours and the sacrifices I've made so we could get to this point. But she didn't budge. She just sat there, cool as a cucumber, saying this was what she needed to do for herself. And that's when I noticed them, the suitcases. They were by the door, already packed. She had planned this. Her calmness made me suspicious. I asked her point blank, "Is there someone else?" She didn't even hesitate before saying no, but her tone was defensive, almost rehearsed. Then she warned me not to go digging, because that would show a lack of trust and make things worse between us. Can you believe that? She was already out the door, and she was worried about my trust issues. As I watched her leave, it hit me just how little control I had over what was happening. Our life, the life I thought we'd built together, wasn't mutual at all. It felt like she had been planning an escape for weeks, maybe even months, and I'd been too blind or too trusting to see it. The way she walked out, it was like she wasn't just leaving the house. She was leaving the person I thought I was to her. That's it for now, I guess. I'm still trying to process what's real and what's not. Should I trust her word, or is there more to this than she's letting on? All I know is, I can't shake the feeling that this trial separation is just the beginning of something much worse. The first night after Janet left was unbearable. I sat in the living room, staring at the empty spot on the couch where she usually curled up with her phone. Her favorite blanket was still draped over the backrest, but she was gone. It felt surreal. I kept telling myself, maybe she's just overwhelmed. She'll realize she made a mistake and come back. But deep down, that voice in my head kept nagging me, this doesn't add up. Her last words before leaving echoed in my head, "Don't go digging." Why would she even say that? If there was nothing to find, why plant the idea? It was like she dared me not to question her. And honestly, the more I thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. Her tone, her body language, it didn't feel like someone rediscovering themselves. It felt like someone running away from something. Or someone. I barely slept that night. By morning, I decided I couldn't just sit around waiting for answers. I had to know what was really going on. So I started retracing the past few weeks, trying to piece together anything I might have missed. Janet had been acting off. At the time, I chalked it up to stress. She was spending a lot of time on her phone lately, always quick to put it face down when I entered the room. She'd been going out more, claiming she needed me time to clear her head. I didn't question it because I trusted her. But now, every little thing seemed like a red flag. I checked our shared credit card statements. Nothing stood out at first: grocery runs, gas, the occasional coffee shop visit. But then I noticed a charge for a fancy restaurant we'd never been to. A $250 bill from a few nights ago. When I asked her about it earlier in the week, she brushed it off, saying it was a work dinner with her colleagues. It hadn't seemed like a big deal then, but now it gnawed at me. Janet's job didn't exactly scream high-end dining. Next, I went through her social media. It was the usual stuff. Pictures of our dog, reposted memes, inspirational quotes about self-care. Nothing suspicious. But then I realized something weird. She hadn't posted a single picture of us together in months. For someone who used to love showing off our little family moments, that was odd. I wanted to believe her, but the doubts were getting louder. And then it hit me, her phone. If there were any answers, they'd be in there. But Janet's phone was like Fort Knox, locked with Face ID and a passcode I didn't know. That's when I remembered her old tablet sitting in the spare room. She barely used it, but it was synced to her account. I rushed to grab it, praying she hadn't changed the password since the last time I used it to stream a movie. When the lock screen swiped open, my heart started racing. I went straight to her messages. Most were mundane, but one conversation stood out, a thread with someone named Alyssa. Except Alyssa's texts weren't about girls' nights or yoga classes. They were strangely cryptic. Alyssa, did he suspect anything last night? Janet, no, he bought the work dinner excuse. But I think I'm pushing it. Alyssa, you've been careful. You deserve this. Just make sure he doesn't find out. My stomach twisted. Deserve what? Careful about what? I scrolled back further, and the truth started to come into focus. There were mentions of hotel nights, sneaking around, and keeping stories straight. The casual tone between them made it clear this wasn't new. This wasn't self-discovery. This wasn't about us. This was a betrayal. The messages on Janet's tablet hit me like a freight train. It was one thing to have suspicions, but seeing proof? That was a whole new level of pain. I felt numb, like I was floating above my body, watching someone else's life fall apart. But I couldn't stop reading. As I scrolled further, I noticed that Alyssa wasn't just some friend offering advice. She was a full-blown accomplice. Alyssa, you need to tell him something soon. It's not fair to keep stringing him along. Janet, I know, but I don't want to hurt him. He's a good guy. He doesn't deserve this. Alyssa, then why are you still with him? Just rip the band-aid off and be with redacted name. Whoever redacted name was, they were the missing piece of this nightmare puzzle. The texts hinted at late-night meetups and whispered promises, but the name was always left out. It was like Janet was deliberately avoiding writing it, even in private. I sat there, tablet in hand, feeling the walls of my life closing in. The woman I had sacrificed for, built a life with, was living a double life. And the worst part? She wasn't just betraying me, she was making me look like an idiot in the process. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Work was a blur. Every nail I hammered felt like it was driving deeper into my chest. By lunch, I decided to call my buddy Mark. He's been my best friend since high school, the kind of guy who's brutally honest but always has your back. When I told him about the messages, he got quiet. Kurt, he finally said, are you sure you want to dig this deep? You already know something's off. Do you really want to confirm it and wreck yourself even more? Yes, I snapped. I need to know. I can't live in this limbo, Mark. After a long pause, he sighed. Then you gotta go all in, man. No half measures. That evening, I decided to put Mark's advice into action. I checked Janet's tablet again, this time digging into her email. Most of it was work-related or spam, but then I found a receipt for a hotel booking. The date matched the same night as the work dinner. The room was for 2 guests. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the confirmation link. The reservation was under her name, but the second guest was marked as unknown. Unknown. That was all it said, but in my heart, I already knew. I was angry, hurt, but mostly, I felt humiliated. She must have thought I'd never figure it out. That I was too busy working or too trusting to notice the cracks in our marriage. I decided to confront her. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for more lies or cryptic messages. That night, I called Janet. Hey, she answered, her tone casual, almost cheerful. Can we meet up tomorrow? We need to talk, I said, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment. Kurt, I don't think that's a good idea. I need space right now. Space. I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. Janet, I found the hotel receipt. The one from the night of your so-called work dinner. We're past the point of space. The line went silent. I could almost hear her scrambling for a response. Kurt, it's not what you think, she finally said, her voice shaky. Then what is it, Janet? Tell me. Because right now, it looks like you've been lying to my face while I was breaking my back for us. Her tone shifted, less defensive, more desperate. Please, don't do this over the phone. Let's talk in person. Fine, I said. Tomorrow. My place. She agreed, and I hung up. My heart was pounding, my head spinning. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough, The next day felt like it lasted a year. I couldn't focus on anything, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Janet was supposed to show up at 7 p.m., but every minute leading up to it dragged on painfully. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, trying to figure out how to keep my emotions in check. By the time her car pulled into the driveway, my heart was racing. She walked in looking like she'd been practicing her lines too, calm, polished, but with a hint of guilt in her eyes. She sat down on the couch and clasped her hands together, like she was preparing to give a speech. "I know you're upset," she started, her voice soft. "But I can explain everything." "Then start explaining," I said, leaning forward. "Because I've got hotel receipts, texts with Alyssa, and a lot of unanswered questions." Janet looked like I'd just slapped her. "You went through my stuff?" "Don't even start with that," I shot back. "You're the one who told me not to dig. That's basically telling me there's something to find." She sighed heavily, like she was carrying the weight of the world. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I've been seeing someone." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing her admit it out loud made it real. "Who?" I demanded. "Who is he?" She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," I interrupted. "It matters a hell of a lot." Janet finally looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "It's David." For a second, I couldn't process what she'd said. David? My coworker? The guy I'd worked side by side with for years, who'd been to our house for barbecues, who'd met my parents. "David," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you serious right now?" "It wasn't planned," she said quickly, like that made it better. "It just happened. It just happened." I exploded, standing up. "You're telling me you accidentally started sneaking around with a guy I trusted? A guy who's supposed to be my friend?" She flinched but didn't deny it. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Kurt. I swear." I laughed bitterly. "Didn't mean to hurt me?" "Janet, you packed your bags and walked out like this was some kind of self-help retreat. Meanwhile, you were screwing someone behind my back. And not just anyone, David." She started crying, but it didn't move me. I was too angry, too hurt. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Was it me? Was I not good enough for you?" Janet shook her head, her tears streaming. "It wasn't about you, Kurt. It was about me. I felt trapped. I needed something different." "Different?" I scoffed. "So you threw away 6 years for different? For a guy who can't even look me in the eye at work?" She tried to reach out, but I stepped back. "Don't," I warned. "Kurt, please." "Save it," I snapped. "You've said enough. I'm done listening to excuses." The conversation ended with Janet walking out the door, again. This time, though, it wasn't her choice. When the door closed, I stood there in the silence, trying to process everything. My wife. My coworker. My life. It felt like everything I thought I knew had been burned to the ground. And the worst part? I still didn't know what to do next. After Janet left, the silence in the house was deafening. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the closed door, the echoes of her confession still ringing in my ears. David. Of all people, it had to be him. I couldn't stay there, not in that moment. The walls felt like they were closing in, every corner of the house a reminder of the life I thought I had. I grabbed my jacket and went for a drive, no destination in mind, just the need to escape. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of Mark's favorite bar, it was already past 9 p.m. The place was buzzing, but all I wanted was a quiet corner and something strong. Mark was there, nursing a beer. When he saw me walk in, he immediately waved me over. "Man, you look like hell," he said as I slumped into the seat across from him. "She admitted it," I muttered, my voice barely audible. "It's David." Mark's expression shifted from concern to anger. "David? Your coworker David." I nodded, staring into the drink the bartender had just placed in front of me. "That piece of," Mark caught himself, lowering his voice. "Kurt, I'm so sorry, man. What are you gonna do?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "She said it wasn't about me, but how can it not be? She said she felt trapped, like I wasn't enough for her." Mark shook his head. "That's garbage, and you know it. You've busted your butt for her, for your future. If she didn't see that, that's on her, not you." We sat there for a while, not saying much. Just two old friends, sharing the kind of silence only years of knowing each other can make comfortable. The next day, I had to face the inevitable, David. There was no avoiding him at work, and honestly, I didn't want to. The idea of seeing him made my blood boil, but I also needed answers. I walked into the office with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. David was in the break room, pouring coffee, acting like nothing was wrong. When he saw me, his face went pale. "Kurt, hey," he stammered, his voice shaky. "Can we talk?" "Oh, we're talking," I said, stepping closer. "But not here." We ended up outside in the parking lot, away from prying eyes. I crossed my arms and waited. "Well," I demanded. He fidgeted, avoiding eye contact. "Look, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "There it is again," I snapped. The magic excuse. "It just happened." "Is that all you've got, David? Because that's not good enough." He ran a hand through his hair, looking more like a guilty teenager than a grown man. "I'm sorry, Kurt. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. I respect you. You're my friend." "Friend?" I laughed bitterly. "You call yourself my friend and then go behind my back with my wife? You're a coward, David. You couldn't even face me until I dragged you out here." He didn't respond, just stared at the ground. "How long?" I asked. David hesitated, then finally met my eyes. "About 6 months." 6 months. Half a year of lies and betrayal. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You disgust me," I said, my voice cold. "Stay away from me, and stay the hell out of my way at work." I didn't wait for a response. I walked back into the building, leaving him standing there, looking as pathetic as he deserved. That night, I sat alone in the house again, replaying the events of the day in my head. Confronting David gave me a tiny bit of closure, but it didn't make the pain go away. It didn't change the fact that my marriage was over, or that I'd been betrayed by not just one, but 2 people I trusted. And this was just the beginning of the fallout. After confronting David, I expected to feel some relief, but all I felt was emptiness. That night, I sifted through every interaction over the past 6 months, trying to see the signs I'd missed. I remembered Janet's late work meetings, and how David always had a reason to skip post-work drinks. It all seemed so obvious now, but at the time, I never questioned it. Why would I? I trusted them both. The next day, Janet called. "I think we should talk about how to move forward," she said. "Move forward?" I scoffed. "You mean with a divorce?" Her voice cracked. "Kurt, I didn't want it to end this way. I didn't plan." "You didn't plan to get caught," I interrupted. "Let's not pretend this was anything but selfishness, Janet." There was a long silence. "You're right," she admitted. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I still want us to part on decent terms." Her words sounded rehearsed, almost mechanical. I agreed to meet, but my walls were up. I wasn't ready to let her rewrite our history like this. Meeting Janet felt like walking into a storm I couldn't avoid. She showed up looking nervous, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. "I don't know where to start," she said, fidgeting with her hands. "How about the truth?" I replied, my voice cold. "No excuses. Just tell me why." She looked down. "I was unhappy, Kurt. Not with you as a person, you're a good man. But I felt invisible, like my needs didn't matter anymore." "Invisible?" I snapped. "I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and put everything I had into our future. How is that invisible?" Janet started crying, but I didn't feel sympathy. "I know I hurt you," she choked out. "I hate myself for it." "Good," I said bluntly. "Because you didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything we built." I ended the conversation quickly, telling her to go through her lawyer from now on. As she left, I realized that this was who she'd always been, someone who put her happiness above everything else, no matter the cost. It was time to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The next few days were consumed by paperwork and phone calls. Janet's lawyer reached out first, making it clear she wanted a clean and amicable divorce. The nerve of it made me laugh. Amicable? After what she did. I hired my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Teresa. She cut through Janet's lawyer's pleasantries like a hot knife through butter. "We'll protect your interests," she assured me. I handed over everything, documents, receipts, and even screenshots of Janet's texts with Alyssa. "This isn't just a separation," I told Teresa. "It's betrayal, and I want it handled accordingly." Teresa nodded. We'll get you what you're owed. Just stay strong. Work was awkward with David skulking around, avoiding eye contact. Word of Janet and me separating started spreading, and while no one outright asked me, I could feel the whispers. I focused on what I could control, getting through the day, checking tasks off my list, and preparing for the battle ahead. Each step was a reminder that I wasn't just letting go of Janet, I was reclaiming my life. About a week after filing the divorce papers, Janet called me out of the blue. Her voice was shaky. "Kurt, I need to see you." "Please," she said. I hesitated. "What for?" "We've said everything that needs saying. There's more." "You deserve to know everything," she replied. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her at a nearby park. When I arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept. "I wasn't honest before," she began. "The affair wasn't just about feeling invisible. David, he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by making this sound like some grand romance. He's a coward, and you're no better." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I pressed on. "What do you want, Janet? Sympathy? Closure? Because you're not getting either." She shook her head. I wanted to apologize. For all of it. I've ruined everything, and I can't fix it." For the first time, I didn't feel anger. Just emptiness. "No, you can't," I said quietly. "You made your choice, and now we both have to live with it." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I won't bother you again. I promise." As she walked away, I realized that this wasn't the closure she wanted, but it was the closure I needed. After that conversation with Janet, something shifted in me. I wasn't okay, far from it, but I felt a glimmer of clarity for the first time since this nightmare began. The next day, I started cleaning out the house. I packed away anything that reminded me of Janet, the framed photos, her favorite throw pillows, even the coffee mug she used every morning. It was painful, but it felt necessary. Mark came by that evening, bringing pizza and a six-pack. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling onto the couch. "Better," I admitted. Getting rid of her stuff helped. He nodded. "Good. But you know what else might help? Getting out of this house. Let's hit the gym again. You used to love it." It had been years since I set foot in a gym, but the idea didn't sound half bad. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow morning." The gym became my outlet. Every rep, every mile on the treadmill, was like releasing another piece of anger and sadness. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again, not the version of me that Janet tore apart, but someone stronger. It wasn't just about rebuilding my body, it was about reclaiming my sense of worth. For the first time in weeks, I began to think about the future, not the one I'd planned with Janet, but the one I'd build for myself. The gym became a lifeline, but life outside those walls was still messy. Word of my divorce spread quickly. In a small town like ours, gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Every trip to the store or the gas station felt like walking into a spotlight. People weren't outright rude, but their looks said enough, sympathy mixed with curiosity. Some offered half-hearted "sorry to hear about you and Janet" comments, while others avoided eye contact altogether, as if my pain was contagious. At work, things were worse. David kept his head down, but his presence was a constant reminder of what had happened. A few coworkers, who'd clearly heard the rumors, looked at me differently, like I was a ticking time bomb. One afternoon, my supervisor, Greg, pulled me aside. "Hey Kurt. Just checking in. Everything okay?" I gave a curt nod. "I'm managing." Greg hesitated, then added, "If you ever need to talk, my door's open. And if you want to switch crews to avoid, awkwardness, just say the word." Part of me appreciated the offer, but another part bristled. I wasn't going to let David push me out of the job I'd worked so hard for. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said firmly. That resolve carried me through the next few weeks. I kept my head down, did my job, and tried to block out the whispers. One Saturday, Mark dragged me to a barbecue at his cousin's place. "You've got to get out, man. Meet some new people," he insisted. I wasn't in the mood, but he didn't give me much of a choice. As we arrived, I felt the familiar anxiety creeping in. Socializing wasn't exactly my strong suit these days. But then I met Mia. She wasn't flashy or overly bubbly, just real. We ended up sitting on the patio, talking about everything from bad country music to our mutual disdain for pineapple on pizza. For the first time in weeks, I laughed without forcing it. As the night wound down, Mia gave me a warm smile. It was nice talking to you, Kurt. Maybe I'll see you around. Yeah, I said, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Hope that conversation with Mia stuck with me. It wasn't love at first sight or anything dramatic, but it reminded me that not everyone was like Janet. There were still good people out there, people worth knowing, worth trusting. I started going to more events, even reconnecting with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Each small interaction felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Janet's betrayal had taken away. At home, I kept working on the house. I painted the living room a fresh color, rearranged the furniture, and started making it feel like my space again. It was cathartic, creating something new out of what felt broken. One night, as I sat on the couch with my dog curled up beside me, I realized something. For the first time since Janet left, I felt a sliver of peace. I still had a long way to go, but I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. I wasn't defined by what she did to me. I was defined by how I was moving forward. The weeks stretched into months, and little by little, life began to feel manageable again. The gym became my second home, a place where I could channel all the anger, frustration, and pain. It wasn't just about getting in shape, it was about proving to myself that I could rebuild, even after everything I'd lost. Mark joined me most mornings, keeping me motivated. "You've got that fire back," he said one day, after I pushed through a grueling set of deadlifts. "Janet may have knocked you down, but you're coming back stronger." Hearing that felt good, but I still wrestled with doubts. Could I ever fully recover? Would I ever trust someone again? One evening, just as I was settling in with a movie, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. Curious, I answered. "Hi, Kurt. It's Alyssa," the voice on the other end said hesitantly. Alyssa. Janet's confidant, the one who had encouraged her during the affair. My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," she began, "but I need to clear the air." I almost hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. "Go on," I said cautiously. She took a deep breath. I didn't agree with everything Janet did. At first, I tried to be supportive because she seemed so unhappy, but it got out of hand. "I thought you should know. David wasn't her first." Her words felt like a slap. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else before him," she admitted. "A guy from her yoga class. It didn't last long, but it was the start of everything. I didn't tell you this to hurt you. I just thought you deserved the truth." I didn't respond right away. My chest felt tight, my mind racing with this new betrayal. Finally, I muttered, "Thanks for letting me know," and hung up. Alyssa's revelation reopened wounds I thought were starting to heal. It wasn't just David. Janet's unhappiness, her deceit, had started long before him. I'd been living a lie for even longer than I realized. The next few days were tough. I threw myself into work in the gym, but the anger simmered beneath the surface. I wanted answers, but I knew I'd never get the full story. Janet wasn't the type to own up to anything she didn't absolutely have to. Mark noticed something was off. "What's eating at you, man?" he asked during a workout. I told him about Alyssa's call, about the new betrayal. He didn't mince words. "You've got to let it go, Kurt. The more you dwell on what she did, the more power you give her. Focus on what's next, not what's behind you." Easier said than done, but he was right. Janet's actions didn't define me. I had to stop letting her mistakes control my future. Few weeks later, I was cleaning the garage when I heard a knock at the door. Wiping my hands on a rag, I opened it to find Mia standing there. "Hey," she said, smiling shyly. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in." "Hope that's okay." "Yeah, of course," I said, caught off guard but happy to see her. "Come on in." We ended up on the back porch, talking as the sun set. She asked about my work, my hobbies, even my dog, who immediately took a liking to her. "I heard about what happened," she said gently, after a pause. "I'm sorry you went through that." "Thanks," I said, trying to brush it off. Mia wasn't having it. "You don't have to pretend you're okay, Kurt. It's okay to be angry. To hurt." Her honesty caught me off guard, and before I knew it, I was telling her everything. About Janet, David, Alyssa's call, and the mess I was trying to clean up. She listened without interrupting, her eyes full of empathy. When I finished, she reached out and touched my hand. "You've been through hell, but you're still standing. That says a lot about who you are." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. For the first time in a long time I felt seen, not as the guy who got cheated on, but as someone worth something, Mia and I started hanging out more after that. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or anything out of a movie. It was slow, cautious, and exactly what I needed. She didn't push me to move faster than I was ready, and I appreciated that. We'd go on walks, grab coffee, or just sit and talk. Each small moment felt like a step toward something better. One night, as we sat on the porch, she asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive Janet?" I thought about it for a moment. "Not for her sake," I said, "but maybe for mine. Carrying all this anger. It's exhausting." Mia nodded. "That's fair. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means letting go of what's holding you back." Her words stayed with me. Maybe it was time to let go, not just of Janet, but of everything tied to her betrayal. I didn't need to erase the past, but I didn't have to let it define my future. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. Signing those papers felt both heavy and freeing, a final acknowledgement that the life I thought I had was over. But with that closure came a strange sense of relief. Janet sent one last message after the court date: "I hope you can forgive me someday. I truly wish you the best, Kurt." I stared at it for a while before deleting it. I didn't need her words or her guilt. What I needed was to move on. With the divorce behind me, I turned my energy to things that gave me purpose. I started volunteering with a local group that rebuilt homes for low-income families. Swinging a hammer for a cause that wasn't tied to my own pain was oddly therapeutic. Mark noticed the change in me. "You're looking lighter these days," he said one afternoon. "Yeah," I replied. "I think I'm finally figuring out who I am without her." And I was. For years, my identity had been tied to Janet and our future together. Now I was learning to stand on my own. Mia became a bigger part of my life, though we kept things low-key. She wasn't trying to fill a void or fix me, she just supported me, and that was more than enough. One evening, as we walked by the river, she asked, "Do you ever think about what's next? Not just with us, but with life?" "I think about it a lot," I admitted. For a while, I didn't see much of a future. But now, I'm starting to feel like anything's possible. Mia smiled. "Good. Because you deserve that." She wasn't just saying it to make me feel better, she believed it. And slowly, I was starting to believe it. 2.1 Unexpected moment of closure came from David. He cornered me at work one day, looking nervous. "Kurt, can we talk?" he asked. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other," I replied coldly. "Please," he said, his voice desperate. "I need to apologize. I was wrong. I know that now, and I'll regret what I did for the rest of my life." I stared at him for a long moment. "Good," I said finally. "You should regret it. But don't expect me to forgive you. We're done here." I walked away, leaving him standing there. For the first time, I felt no anger, just pity for a man who had thrown away his integrity for something so fleeting. One quiet evening, as I sat on the back porch with Mia and my dog, I realized I felt content. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, and it was starting to feel good again. Janet's betrayal had taught me some hard lessons about trust, love, and resilience. But it didn't define me anymore. I was stronger now, ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to start dreaming again. The trip to the lake with Mia felt like stepping into a different world, a world where the weight of betrayal didn't follow me. The drive was easy, filled with casual conversation and laughter. For the first time in months, I felt light, like I could breathe again. When we got there, we set up a small picnic by the water. The air was crisp, and the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the lake. Mia kicked off her shoes and waded into the shallow water, playfully splashing me when I joined her. "Hey!" I laughed, retaliating with a splash of my own. Her laugh was infectious, and for a moment, it felt like all the chaos of the past year had never happened. Later, as we sat on a blanket watching the sunset, Mia turned to me. "You seem different today," she said softly. "Lighter somehow." I thought about it for a moment. "I think I am," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful." She smiled, her eyes warm. "That's good, Kurt. You deserve to feel that way." As things with Mia deepened, I realized how much damage Janet's betrayal had done to my ability to trust. Every time Mia laughed at one of my jokes or gave me a reassuring touch, a small voice in my head would whisper, "What if she leaves too? What if she's hiding something?" I hated that voice, but I couldn't silence it completely. One evening, as we sat on my porch sipping coffee, I decided to bring it up. "Mia, can I ask you something? I began, staring at the steam rising from my mug. Of course, she said, turning to face me. Does it ever bother you that I have baggage? That I'm still working through all this? She took a moment before answering. Kurt, everyone has baggage. The question isn't whether you have it, it's whether you're willing to work through it. And you are. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I just don't want to mess this up, I admitted. You won't, she said firmly. As long as you're honest with me, we'll figure it out together. Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. A few weeks later, I got a call from Teresa, my lawyer. The divorce was finalized. It's official, she said. You're free. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Freedom sounded good on paper, but it also meant the end of something I'd spent years building. Even though Janet had betrayed me, there was still a sense of loss of the future we'd planned, of the version of myself I'd been with her. That weekend, I packed up the last of Janet's belongings and dropped them off at her new place. She wasn't home, which was probably for the best. As I set the box on her porch, I noticed something. Her garden, the one she'd loved so much, was overgrown and neglected. It was a stark contrast to the way she'd once taken such pride in it. It hit me then that Janet wasn't thriving in her new life. She might have thought the affair would bring her happiness, but it seemed like she was struggling too. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But I quickly shook it off. Janet's choices had led her here, just as mine had led me to Mia. The next few months were a blur of progress. The house felt like my own again, filled with new furniture, new memories, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Mia became a bigger part of my life, and with her came a renewed sense of purpose. We started exploring the town together, taking day trips, and hosting small dinners with friends. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Mia turned to me. You're smiling more these days, she said, resting her head on my shoulder. Yeah, I said, surprised to realize how true it was. I like it, she added, squeezing my hand. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I kissed her forehead and let myself enjoy the moment. One afternoon, I got a surprise visitor, David. He showed up at my job, looking nervous and unsure of himself. Kurt, can we talk? He asked. I don't think we have anything left to say, I replied coldly. Please, he insisted. I know I don't deserve your time, but I just need to apologize. I folded my arms, letting him speak. I screwed up. I let my feelings get in the way of doing what was right, and I hurt you in the worst way possible. I've been carrying that guilt every day, and I'm sorry, he said, his voice trembling. For a moment, I considered lashing out, letting him feel the full weight of my anger. But instead I simply said, I've moved on, David. You should too. He nodded, his shoulders slumping as he walked away. That encounter with David solidified something for me. I was done living in the past. My life wasn't about Janet or David anymore. It was about me, my growth, my happiness, my future. Mia and I started talking about what that future might look like. While we weren't rushing into anything, the possibility of building something meaningful together felt real. One night, as we sat by the lake where we'd first started to connect, Mia asked, "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes, I admitted. But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have found this. Found you. She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. I think we both got lucky. For the first time in a long time, I truly believed that 6 months after my divorce was finalized, life looked entirely different. The house no longer felt like a museum of lost dreams. It was mine, filled with the kind of warmth and peace I never thought I'd find again. Mia had become a steady presence in my life. She didn't try to fill the gaps Janet left or rush me toward anything. Instead, she reminded me every day that life could still be good, even after the worst of betrayals. One morning, as I was heading out the door, I saw a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakably Janet's. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to even open it. Eventually, curiosity won. Inside was a short note. Kurt, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I've moved out of town. I thought it would be better for both of us. I'm trying to rebuild my life, just as I know you are. I'm sorry for everything I did to hurt you. You didn't deserve it, and I'll carry that regret forever. I hope you find the happiness you've always deserved. Janet. I read it twice, then folded it and set it aside. It didn't stir anger or sadness, just a quiet sense of finality. Janet was truly gone, and that chapter of my life was over. Few weeks later, Mia and I went to a small music festival on the edge of town. We laughed, danced, and sang along to songs we barely knew. By the end of the night, I realized something. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. The pain and betrayal that had consumed me felt like a distant memory. As we sat on a blanket under the stars, Mia turned to me. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," I said, smiling. "But mostly how glad I am to be here with you." She rested her head on my chest. "Me too. Life isn't perfect, it never is. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like it's mine again. I'm not defined by Janet's choices or David's betrayal. I'm defined by how I chose to rise from it. Mia and I aren't rushing into anything, but there's an undeniable connection between us. Whether it's heading out on spontaneous road trips or spending quiet evenings together, I'm starting to believe in the future again. And for the first time in a long time, I'm hopeful. The past didn't break me. It shaped me. And now, I'm ready to write a new story, on my own terms." That's it, Reddit. Thanks for listening. I didn't know if I'd ever get here, but if you're going through something similar, take it from me, there's life after betrayal. You just have to fight for it.